Lakeisha Barnes was 28 years old, a big, beautiful woman with a smile so warm it could light up any room and a spirit strong enough to carry the whole world on her back. She wasn't slim like the women on the billboards along Brickell Avenue, the ones with the flat stomachs and the thighs that never touched. Lakeisha was full-figured, gloriously so, and in that fullness lived something special. Her heart was the kind that loved deeply, and her will was the kind that never broke, no matter how many times life tried. She rode 2 buses every morning to get to a building where nobody knew her name. Not her real name. At KMG Capital Group, the gleaming glass tower on Brickell Avenue, she was nobody. The woman in the gray uniform. The one who emptied the trash before anyone arrived and wiped down the counters after everyone left. A shadow that moved through the hallways unseen, noticed only when something wasn't clean enough. Her name was Lakeisha Barnes. And she was about to change everything in that building. She just didn't know it yet. Before we go any further into this story, I want to ask you something. And I want you to sit with it honestly, the way you sit with things late at night when the house is quiet and it's just you and your own thoughts. Have you ever been in a room where everything you had to offer was invisible to the people who needed it most? Have you ever been the smartest person doing the smallest job, not because you chose it, but because life backed you into that corner and you didn't have the luxury of waiting for a better door to open? Marcin, have you ever watched someone finally see you, really see you? If this story is already doing something to you, if you already feel the pull of it, I want you to do something right now. Hit that like button, because your support tells us these stories matter and deserve to be told. Subscribe to this channel because every single week we bring you stories exactly like this one. Immersive, emotional, real in every way that counts. And share this video with someone who needs it tonight. Someone who needs to be reminded that change is possible, that it is never too late to choose differently, that love, real love, is worth whatever it costs to become worthy of it. Your support helps this community grow, and this community exists for people who believe that stories like this one are worth telling. This is Lakeisha's story. Liberty City woke up before the sun. It always had. This was the thing about the neighborhood that people who'd never lived there didn't understand, the thing that got lost in whatever they'd read about it or heard about it or decided about it from a safe distance. Liberty City was alive. It was loud and it was complicated and it had more grief per square mile than most places would know what to do with. But it was alive in a way that Brickell, with all its gleaming towers and valet parking and $60 cocktails, would never be. It had the kind of life that came from people who had survived things, who had kept going not because it was easy but because stopping was not an option they were willing to consider. Lakeisha Barnes had grown up inside that survival. She had learned it the way children learn the things that matter most, not from being told, but from watching. She had watched her grandmother, Miss Gloria, rise at 4:30 every single morning for 37 years. Miss Gloria made breakfast before the light came. She ironed her uniform in the blue darkness of the kitchen, while the radio played gospel low enough not to wake the children. She moved through her life with a kind of quiet, relentless intention that Lakeisha had absorbed without ever being instructed to, the way children absorb the things they love most about the people who raise them. Miss Gloria used to say, while pressing the creases into her work clothes with that old iron that hissed steam like it had opinions, "Baby, nobody is coming to carry you, but that doesn't mean you walk alone. God put legs on you for a reason. You use them, and you trust that the road will hold." Lakeisha had held on to those words through things that should have broken her. She was holding on to them now, at 5:45 in the morning, standing at the bathroom mirror of her small apartment on 62nd Street, the one she shared with her brother Devante, looking at herself with the particular expression of a person preparing for battle. She was 28 years old. She was full-figured in the way that made women in her family say she had her grandmother's build, which was meant as a compliment and received as one. She had dark, E's smooth skin and natural hair that she coiled up and secured before work, and eyes that Miss Gloria said saw too much for a young person, which also meant exactly what it said. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room when she let herself, and had learned, over years of working in rooms that hadn't asked for her light, to keep it carefully dimmed. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. "I am not the one today," she said quietly, to herself, to the mirror, to whatever version of this morning was waiting for her. Then she went to the kitchen counter where Devante's medications were lined up in the careful order she arranged them every night before bed. 12 pills total between the morning and evening doses. She counted them the way she counted everything important, twice. Then once more because Devante's kidneys didn't give second chances, and neither did the bus schedule. Devante was 20 years old and had been living with kidney disease since he was 16. He was currently at Jackson Memorial Hospital for a treatment adjustment that was supposed to take 2 weeks and had stretched into 5. The treatments were working, his doctors said, with the careful optimism of people who knew better than to make promises, but working slowly, and slowly in medical terms, meant expensively in real ones. Lakeisha paid for all of it. The insurance covered some, the hospital's financial assistance program covered more, and Lakeisha covered the rest with every dollar she made and every dollar she could find. She had a marketing degree from Florida A&M University that she had earned on scholarship. In a degree she was proud of, in the deep, private way she was proud of things she couldn't yet afford to do anything with. She had graduated with honors. She had written her senior thesis on brand positioning for underserved consumer markets, and her professor had told her she had a genuinely rare instinct for how people made decisions and what moved them. She had left that graduation ceremony with a diploma and a head full of ideas, and walked directly into a city that did not care about either. She had applied to marketing firms. She had sent out 43 applications in 6 months with a resume that was real and strong and honest, and she had received 4 interviews and 0 offers, and she was still not sure whether it was her resume or her face on the Zoom calls, or something she would never be able to name, that had closed those doors. What she knew was that Devante's bills did not pause while she figured it out. What she knew was that the cleaning position at KMG Capital Group paid $11 more per hour than anything else she had found, and offered health insurance after 90 days, and she had taken it the same afternoon she saw the listing. That had been 14 months ago. She packed her lunch now with the focused efficiency of someone who has done something so many times, it has become a kind of meditation. A turkey sandwich on whole wheat, an apple, a small container of the red beans and rice she had made Sunday night from her grandmother's recipe. She packed it into a blue lunch bag and put it in the bottom of her tote, alongside the spiral notebook she carried everywhere. The notebook was thick and soft-covered and nearly full. She had started it 8 months ago, after a particularly long night cleaning the executive floor, when she had sat for 10 minutes on the floor of the empty conference room, just sitting there in her uniform surrounded by the remnants of some presentation she hadn't been invited to, and thought, "I know how to do this. I know how to do this better than this." And she had gone home and written for 3 hours. All the ideas that moved through her head during work hours when she had no permission to say them out loud. Campaign strategies, brand angles, market positioning for clients she had learned about from overhearing conversations and reading the materials she cleaned around and filed away. Ideas that were good. Ideas she knew were good. Min-Jun Lee arrived at the office at exactly 8:58 every morning. Not 8:55, not 9, 8:58. His assistant, Jenny, had worked for him for 2 years, and she had eventually understood that this was not accidental. He moved through his day with a precision that she had initially found unnerving and had come to respect in the way you respect weather, not because it was kind, but because it was consistent. He was not a man who wasted time. which meant being around him required you to not waste time either, which meant everyone on his floor moved differently when he was present. Faster. More deliberately. With the slight hypervigilance of people who knew they were being watched by someone who missed nothing. He was 37. He had been in Miami for 3 years, having relocated the American headquarters of his family's investment group from New York to Brickell during a period when half of New York's finance world seemed to be doing the same thing. He was tall for a Korean man, lean, and wore suits the way some people wear armor, with a kind of unconscious authority that communicated itself before he spoke a word. His English was excellent and formal in a way that was not accented so much as precise, as if he had learned it as a second language, and then exceeded most native speakers in the quality of his attention to it. He was recently, quietly, privately single. Claire Hahn had been his fiancée for 11 months. She was everything his family had selected her to be, which was the problem, or the beginning of understanding the problem, which was that Minjun had eventually realized he had been chosen for her as much as she had been chosen for him, and that neither of them had been consulted meaningfully about their own feelings on the matter, and that the absence of feeling he noticed when he thought about their future was not the calm of certainty, but the blankness of having never asked himself the right question. He had ended the engagement 6 weeks ago. His mother, Mrs. Lee, had called from Seoul and spoken to him for 47 minutes in a tone of controlled disappointment that he had grown up understanding was the most serious register she possessed. He had listened. He had explained, as clearly as he could, or that he was not able to marry someone he did not love with any genuine conviction. His mother had said that love, as a precondition for marriage, was a relatively modern and largely Western idea. He had said that he lived in the West. She had paused and then changed tactics. He had held firm. He had not entirely understood why, since firmness was not typically how he related to his mother's expectations. But something in him had been unmovable on this particular point, and he had followed that something even without being able to name it. He arrived at the office at 8:58. He sat at his desk. He opened the Henderson account brief. He found the note. He read it once. He set it down. He looked out the window at the Miami skyline, the city spread out below him in the clear morning light. The ocean in the distance doing what it always did, which was to look completely indifferent to everything happening on land. He read the note again. It was written on paper torn from a spiral notebook, in handwriting that was clear and slightly rushed, as if the person writing it was thinking faster than their hand could manage. It began, "There is an error in the Henderson segmentation data that will cause this campaign to fail publicly. Here is where it is, and here is why it matters, and here is what should replace it." And then it proceeded to do exactly that, in 4 paragraphs that were more analytically precise than anything his senior team had produced in their 3 weeks on this account. He read it a third time. Then he called Jenny. Someone left an analysis on the Henderson brief, handwritten, on the conference room table. I need to know who wrote it. Jenny called back 40 minutes later with the information she'd gathered from the night security log, the cleaning staff schedule, and 2 conversations with the facilities manager. It was one of the cleaning staff, sir. A woman named Lakeisha Barnes. She was the last one on the floor last night. She's been with the company 14 months. Minjun was quiet for a moment. Pull her HR file. He read Lakeisha Barnes's file with the same attention he gave every document that mattered, which was considerable. Florida A&M University, Bachelor of Science in Marketing, concentration in brand strategy. GPA 3.81, Dean's List, 3 out of 4 years. Applied for a cleaning position. No cover letter explanation for the discrepancy, just the application. He sat back in his chair. He thought about the analysis on his desk and the file on his screen for a long time, in the particular focused quiet that was the closest Minjun Lee ever got to stillness. Then he called Jenny again. I need a new contract drafted. Junior analyst, third floor, reporting to the Henderson account team. Use the standard salary band, effective immediately. For who? Jenny asked. Lakeisha Barnes, he said, from facilities. There was a pause. Sir, there's no open position on the third floor. Create one, he said. Not unkindly, just the way he said things that were going to happen regardless. Lakeisha found the envelope on her cleaning cart on Monday morning. It was sealed and had her name on it in a font she recognized as the company's internal correspondence template. She stood in the supply room for a moment, holding it. She had a feeling, low in her stomach, of something about to change. She didn't know what kind of change. She had learned not to assume. She took the envelope to her stairwell. She sat on the step where she always sat, at the window with the sliver of blue water in the distance. She opened the envelope carefully, the way she opened things she wanted to be able to close again if necessary. She read the contract. She read it twice. A third time, slower. Junior analyst, third floor. A salary number that made her hand tighten on the paper because it was more money than she had ever made in a year, in 1 year, in her entire life. Starting immediately. She sat there for a long moment, very still, the contract in her hands. Then she covered her mouth and bent forward slightly, and for 5 minutes she cried in the way she cried when she was alone, which was the only way she let herself really cry, fully and without managing it, her shoulders shaking, tears falling onto the contract she was careful not to wrinkle. She cried for 14 months of gray uniforms and stairwell lunches, and things she knew and couldn't say, and ideas she had written in a notebook nobody asked to see. She cried for Devante and Miss Gloria and Florida A and M and the 43 applications that had gone nowhere. She cried for the girl who had stood at her grandmother's kitchen table at 22 years old, with a diploma in her hands, believing everything was about to be different, and for the woman sitting on a stairwell at 28, who was only now, only right this minute, beginning to believe that it might actually be 5 minutes. And then she wiped her face. She breathed. She straightened her back. She went to find her new desk. The office knew by noon. She was not sure how. Whether Jenny had told someone, whether it was in some system notification, whether the simple fact of her sitting at a third-floor analyst's desk in her regular clothes instead of her gray uniform was enough. However it happened, by noon the third floor knew, and by 2 o'clock the whole company knew. And by 3 o'clock, Brittany Cole had walked past Lakeisha's new desk twice with an expression that was technically neutral and actually the sharpest knife in the room. The comments came in the architecture of plausible deniability that cruelty perfected over time. At the coffee machine. Good for her, I guess. I just hope she has the background for it. Said lightly, to someone else. Now while Lakeisha was within earshot. In a team meeting that Lakeisha was included in for the first time. We usually brief the analysts separately, so Lakeisha, you might want to. A pause, a small smile. Get up to speed on the process first. Said helpfully. Said in the voice of someone doing a newcomer a favor. Said with the specific intention of establishing, in front of everyone, that Lakeisha was behind. That she didn't belong at the table. Lakeisha sat at that table with her notebook open and her face composed and her pen moving, and she took better notes than anyone else in the room because she had been listening to this company's business for 14 months from the outside, and she understood the landscape better than people who had been handed a badge and a desk on day one. She said nothing about that. She wrote. She listened. She waited. What she was less prepared for was the daily accumulation of it, the group chat she was never added to, so that by the time she arrived at her desk in the morning, there were already decisions made and directions shifted that she had to piece together from the meeting agendas. Her work submitted to the senior review late because it had sat in someone's outbox longer than it should have. Her ideas attributed in meetings to others who had seen her drafts. One afternoon, early in her third week, she found a note on her keyboard, written in Korean. She stared at it for a moment, then photographed it and had it translated on her phone. It said, "Wrong floor, wrong building. Wrong city." She folded the note very carefully and put it in the back pocket of her notebook, and she did not look at it again, and she did not tell anyone, and she went back to work. She called Devante that evening from the parking garage before she caught her bus home. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was having a decent day, and she felt the tightness in her chest loosen a fraction. "How's my baby?" she said. "I'm not a baby, I'm 20, Devante said. "The nurse thinks I'm charming." "The nurse is being nice." "Nah, she's serious. I got evidence." She laughed. The parking garage echoed it back at her. "How are you feeling?" "Better than yesterday. My levels are down. Dr. Okafor says if this trend holds, she might adjust my treatment schedule." A pause. "How was your day?" She thought about the note on her keyboard. She thought about Brittany's 2 passes by her desk. She thought about being invisible for 14 months, and then visible in all the wrong ways. "It was a day," she said. "Devante, your levels are down. That's what matters. That's the whole thing." He was quiet for a moment. "Kay. Yeah. You know I see you, right? Even from here." She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a second. "I know, baby. I know." She caught her bus home. She sat in the back. She opened her notebook and wrote for 40 minutes straight, an analysis of the Henderson account's competitive positioning that was frankly better than anything currently in the campaign file. She wrote because it was the only place she was free to be fully herself, and because she was not going to let anyone or anything make her stop. The break room incident happened on a Tuesday in Lakeisha's 5th week. She had stayed late the night before working on a new angle for the Henderson campaign's digital strategy. She had come in early. She had it ready before the 10 o'clock internal presentation, and it was, she knew with the quiet certainty of someone who had been good at this for years before anyone was paying attention, the best idea in the room. She presented it. She stood at the head of the table that had been cleaned by the woman she used to be, and she presented with the measured confidence of someone who knew her material completely, and she watched the room go still in the particular way rooms go still when they've heard something that works. Then Brittany smiled. She smiled in the bright, considered way she had perfected, the smile that preceded something that would land wrong and be unchallengeable, and she said, "That's a sweet angle, Lakeisha. I really like that you're contributing. We just want to make sure everything we put in front of the client reflects the room we're presenting to. You know what I mean? It needs to feel right to them. Culturally, contextually." A small, meaningful pause. That's something that comes with experience in these specific client relationships. The room was very still. What Brittany had just said, wrapped in 5 layers of professional reasonableness, was this: "You are not the kind of person our clients want to see. Your face, your background, your body. Whatever you are, it does not fit here, and your ideas, however good they are, will be too associated with you for me to allow them to matter." Everyone in the room understood it. Some of them had the decency to look uncomfortable. Nobody spoke. Lakeisha held Brittany's gaze for one long, measured moment. She did not let her face show what was happening inside her chest, which was a fire, a genuine white-hot fire that she had been keeping contained for 5 weeks, and that threatened in that moment to consume every professional calculation she had made about how to survive in this place. She didn't let it. She gathered her notes. She tucked them under her arm. She looked around the room once, at all those faces, and she said, "Thank you for the feedback," in the voice that meant something entirely different from the words, and she walked out. She went to the women's bathroom on the 4th floor, the one that was usually quiet at this hour. She stood at the sink and ran cold water over her wrists and looked at herself in the mirror and had a conversation with herself that was entirely internal and completely necessary. She thought about Miss Gloria ironing in the dark. She thought about 2 buses. She thought about Devante's medication lined up on the kitchen counter. 12 pills, counted twice. She thought about 43 applications. She thought about a spiral notebook full of ideas that had already been right once, right enough that the CEO of this company had given her a desk. And she thought, I did not come this far to fold. She turned off the water. She dried her hands. She looked at herself one more time. She went back to her desk and she kept working. That evening at 11:45, Min Jun reviewed security footage from the building's interior cameras in the course of a compliance review, and he watched the break room from 10:22 to 10:29. He watched the presentation. He watched the room. He watched Brittany's face while she delivered her assessment. He watched Lakeisha's face as she received it. He watched her walk out. He sat at his desk for a long time after. The Miami skyline outside his window was lit up in the nighttime way that was different from the daytime way, sharper and colder and more honest somehow. He pulled up Lakeisha's personnel file again. He read her analysis of the Henderson account that he had requested through Jenny without identifying it as his request. He read it the way he read things that mattered, slowly and completely. He sat with it. He had known a great many people in his professional life who were technically excellent at their work. He had known very few who could see the thing behind the thing, who could look at a problem and understand not just what it was, but why it was, and what it needed. That gift was rarer than most people realized. It was the difference between someone who could execute and someone who could lead. It was not something you could manufacture or teach, not fully. Either you had the eye, or you didn't. Lakeisha Barnes had it. She had been cleaning his floors for 14 months. He thought about that for a long time. The kitchen on the executive floor at 11:30 at night was quiet in the way that expensive places were quiet after hours, a kind of resting quality to the air, as if the building itself was exhaling after a long day of being important. Lakeisha had been working late again, alone on the third floor after everyone else had gone. She had a new draft of the Henderson segmentation, and she was going to finish it tonight, because finishing things was how she had gotten through every hard season of her life, one completed thing at a time. And besides, the buses ran later on Tuesdays, and she had the time. She was heating up the last of her rice and beans from Sunday in the break room microwave, standing in her socks because her feet hurt, her phone pressed to her ear. Devante had answered on the first ring tonight. The door opened. She spun around so fast she nearly dropped her phone. Min Jun Lee stood in the doorway in his work clothes. He holding a file folder and looking at her with the expression of someone who had expected an empty kitchen and adjusted quickly to the reality that it wasn't. Lakeisha stared at him. Her socks were on the tile floor and her lunch container was open on the counter, and she had been describing Miami like a children's story into her phone, and the CEO of the entire company was standing 8 feet away. "I'll call you back," she said to Devante. "Was that?" "I'll call you back," she said again, and ended the call. She straightened. She prepared to apologize for being in the kitchen, though she was not certain why it would require an apology, except that every instinct she had developed over 14 months in this building told her to make herself smaller and less remarkable as quickly as possible. Min Jun looked at the microwave, then at her food, then at her expression. "That brand of rice and beans is from the cafeteria downstairs," he said. "It's not good." She blinked. "I brought it from home." "Oh." A pause. "What is it?" "Red beans and rice. My grandmother's recipe." He nodded once. Then he opened the cabinet to the left of the microwave and took out a white paper bag that turned out to contain 2 foil-wrapped croquetas from the cafe on the ground floor of the building. "These are better," he said, and held them out in her direction in a gesture that was technically an offer, and delivered with the slight social awkwardness of a man who was not accustomed to offering people things in kitchens at midnight. "I order extra. They refrigerate well." She looked at the croquetas. She looked at him. She could not fully read the situation, which was an unusual experience for her. "Thank you," she said carefully, and took them. "I work late often," he said, which seemed to be his way of explaining his presence without further elaborating on it, and then he went back down the hallway toward his office. She stood in the kitchen alone for a moment. Then she unwrapped the croqueta and took a bite, and it was, genuinely, significantly better than the rice and beans. She stood at the window and looked at the firefly city and ate it, and felt something that she was not prepared to name yet, but that was warm and small and alive in her chest, like an ember that someone had just breathed on. She laughed softly to herself, to no one, just at the unexpectedness of it, at the absurdity of this particular moment in this particular life. Then she called Devante back. "Okay, so the city," she said. "Fireflies. Where was I?" It became a thing. Not a scheduled thing, nothing as deliberate as that, but a pattern that established itself over the next several weeks the way patterns do, through repetition that neither person officially acknowledged was repetition. Lakeisha worked late because the work was better when the office was quiet, and she didn't have to manage her presence around people who were managing their opinions of her. Minjun worked late because he always worked late, and his apartment in Brickell, 12 minutes away, was large and well-designed and had excellent views and felt, when he was honest with himself, like a very expensive place to be alone. The kitchen. 11:30, midnight, sometimes later. They overlapped there the way people overlap in transit spaces, briefly and regularly. And the brief, regular overlapping began, gradually, to extend itself. It started with the food. He began leaving things in the cabinet on the left, Cuban food from the cafe downstairs that he told Jenny to double the order on without explaining why. She stopped bringing her stairwell lunch to the office late hours because the croquetas were genuinely better, and because the cabinet on the left had become, she acknowledged only to herself, a kind of small private language she wasn't ready to translate yet. Then it was the coffee. Miami ran on Cuban coffee, the thick, sweet cafecito that hit different from everything else, and Minjun had started making it properly somewhere in his first year in the city, and he made it well. He made 2 cups without asking once, and set one in her general direction, and she accepted it without making it into a moment, and they stood at the window and drank it, and looked at the city and talked about the Henderson account. The work was the first bridge. They could both talk about the work without it being complicated, without it requiring them to acknowledge what else was happening in the room, so they talked about the work, and through the work they talked about everything else. He told her that the Henderson account was actually a symptom of a larger misalignment in how KMG was approaching consumer-facing brand work, that they had gotten too comfortable with a certain client type and lost their edge with brands that needed to speak to evolving markets. She said that was exactly right, and told him why with a specificity that made him stop and look at her, and then ask her to explain the second point again. She told him about Florida A&M, about the thesis, about the 43 applications and the 4 interviews, and the way she had eventually stopped trying to figure out exactly which door each of them had closed and why, because that way led to a room she couldn't afford to stay in. He was quiet for a moment after she said that. "You stopped applying?" "I stopped applying to marketing firms," she said. "I applied here for a different position." "I know," he said. "I know you know," she said. "I'm not complaining about it. I'm explaining what happened." "There's a difference," he said. "There's a difference," she agreed. He asked about Devante, and she told him about the kidney disease, and Jackson Memorial, and the treatment, and the bills, and the 12 pills on the kitchen counter counted twice every night, and he listened the way he listened when he was fully present in a thing, which was completely, without the small distractions most people brought to difficult information. When she finished, he said, "Is the treatment working?" She said, "Slowly." He said, "Slowly is still working." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "It is." She learned that he had not been to the beach since moving to Miami 3 years ago. She stared at him when he said this. "You live here," she said. "You live 12 minutes from the ocean." 14, he said. It's 14 minutes. Minjun, it's the beach. I have a demanding schedule. Everybody has a demanding schedule. At the beach doesn't care. He looked at her with the expression of a man who was not used to being spoken to like this by anyone, not in anger, not in disrespect. Just plainly. Just like a person talking to another person. She saw that he didn't know what to do with it, and she filed it away. He went to Jackson Memorial on a Saturday. He had thought about it for a week, and decided, without entirely being able to explain the decision to himself, that it was the right thing to do. He stopped at the Haitian restaurant on 54th Street that Lakeisha had mentioned Devante loved. She had said this once, in passing, that her brother could eat his weight in griot if given the opportunity. And he arrived at the hospital on a Saturday afternoon carrying a container of griot and plantains that was probably enough food for 3 people. The nurse at the desk looked at him for a moment. Lakeisha was already there. He saw her before she saw him, sitting beside Devante's bed with her shoes off and her feet tucked up under her, reading something on her phone, while Devante was watching something on a tablet, and they were both sharing the easy, comfortable silence of people who have been close their whole lives. He stopped in the doorway. He had seen Lakeisha in the office, composed and careful, and he had seen her in the kitchen late at night. More herself. But this was different. This was her, all the way home in herself, in the realest room she occupied, and he looked at her for a moment before either of them noticed him, and he felt something that he had been not feeling for several weeks now, and that was getting increasingly difficult to not feel. Devante saw him first. Devante's eyes went from the griot container to Minjun's face to his sister and back, and his expression settled into the assessing intelligence of a younger brother who understood his sister completely. Lakeisha looked up. "What are you?" She stopped. She looked at the food. She looked at him. "How did you know about 54th Street? "You mentioned it," he said. "Once." He held out the container. "I wasn't sure what he could eat, so I asked the nurse before I came up." Devante looked at his sister. Lakeisha was looking at the container with an expression that was doing several things at once. "Well," Devante said pleasantly, "don't just stand in the door." Minjun came in. He sat in the chair on the other side of the bed. Devante accepted the food with the easy grace of someone who had decided he liked this situation and was going to lean into it, and they sat there, the 3 of them, in the particular arrangement of people who are not quite sure how they got to this specific moment but are, on some level, glad they did. "So," Devante said, eating, looking at Minjun with clear, calm eyes, "you're the boss." "I am," Minjun said. "She's smarter than you." The room went very quiet. Lakeisha made a sound that was not quite a word. Minjun looked at Devante for a moment. Then he said, "I know." Devante nodded, satisfied. He went back to his food. Lakeisha was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone who had decided the ceiling was very interesting. Minjun looked at her profile. He looked at the line of her jaw and the curve of her mouth, and the grandmother's gold earrings she was wearing even in the hospital on a Saturday, and he thought, "I know." He stayed for an hour and a half. When he left, Devante watched the door close behind him and then looked at his sister. "Okay," Devante said. "Don't," Lakeisha said. "I'm just saying." Devante. He remembered the restaurant. From once. He came to a hospital on a Saturday. A pause. "I'm just saying." Lakeisha looked at her brother. She picked up her phone. She looked at the door Minjun had just gone through. "Eat your food," she said. But she was smiling. Very slightly, facing away, so Devante couldn't see it. Except that Devante could absolutely see it because he knew her face better than she did. He smiled too. He ate his griot. He said nothing more because he didn't need to. It was Marcus who said it out loud first. Marcus Webb had been Lakeisha's best friend since the 4th grade at Liberty City Elementary, which made him 24 years of knowing her better than almost anyone. He drove a delivery truck during the week, and coached youth basketball on weekends, and had strong opinions about most things, and no patience for uncertainty when clarity was available. He called her on a Wednesday night when she was on her way home from work. "Somebody told me your boss came to see Devante," he said. No preamble. Marcus did not do preamble. "Who told you that?" "Devante told me that." "What's happening, Kay?" "Nothing is happening. His name is Minjun." "I know his name, Marcus. I work for him." "You told me his name in a way that means something." She was on the bus. She leaned her head against the window. The Miami night slid past outside, the particular texture of the city at 10 p.m., busy and lit and indifferent. "It's complicated," she said. Complicated like he's my boss and I need this job, and Devante's bills are not getting smaller and the people on the third floor already think I don't belong there, and I cannot afford to add more to what is already a significant amount of complicated. She said this in one breath. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "But?" he said. She closed her eyes. He remembered the restaurant. From one time that I mentioned it, casually, weeks ago. Marcus said nothing. "And he came on a Saturday," she said. More silence. "And he told Devante he knows I'm smarter than him." Marcus made a sound, a long, low sound of consideration. "Okay," he said finally. "Marcus, I'm not saying anything." "You're saying something with your whole face. I can hear it." "I'm just saying that a man doesn't drive to a hospital on a Saturday with food from a specific restaurant that he remembered from one time, unless there is a very specific reason for that." Lakeisha was quiet. "I'm not saying trust it," Marcus said. "I'm saying see it. There's a difference." She thought about the kitchen, the croquetas on the left, the Cuban coffee made without asking. 11:30, midnight, the city outside the window. The way he listened. "I see it," she said quietly. "Okay then," Marcus said. She rode the bus home. She sat in the back. She opened her notebook. She wrote for 40 minutes. Not about work this time. Just wrote. Words that weren't for anything except her own accounting of what was happening, which was what she had always used the notebook for when things got too large to carry, without putting some of them down somewhere. The photo appeared on a Monday morning. Someone had been outside Jackson Memorial on that Saturday with a camera phone, or perhaps had been in the lobby and had the right angle. The image was not great quality, but it was clear enough. Minjun Lee, CEO of KMG Capital Group, leaving Jackson Memorial Hospital with a black woman beside him, both of them carrying the particular body language of people who were not strangers. By the time Lakeisha got to her desk, the image had been on a Miami business gossip blog since 6 in the morning. He posted with a caption that managed to be insulting in 12 words, and technically just a question. She saw it because Brittany had pulled it up on her computer at a size that was visible from the hallway when Lakeisha walked past, and made very sure to be on the phone, voice slightly raised, saying, "I mean, who even is she? Nobody knows anything about her. She was cleaning the floors 6 months ago. Where does someone like that—" She stopped when she saw Lakeisha. They held eye contact for a moment. Lakeisha kept walking. She sat at her desk. She opened her laptop. She opened the Henderson file. She started working. She was good at this. She had been surviving variations of this her whole life, and she was good at it. What it cost her was a different question, one she answered privately, at home, at night, in the notebook, and nowhere else. The comments online were the kind of comments that existed specifically to locate whatever was most vulnerable in a person and press there. They went after her appearance with the particular gleeful cruelty of people who had decided that some bodies were public property for judgment. They went after her background, her neighborhood, her credentials, the job she'd had before the one she had now. Some of them were in a register of racism that she had encountered so many times in her life that she had developed a protective numbness to its surface, though the deeper damage was always there, always cumulative, always added to the total. She did not read the comments more than once. She read them once because it was better to know than to not know, and then she closed the page and went back to work. But the weight of it was real. She felt it in her body by the end of that day, a physical heaviness in her shoulders, a tightness in her jaw from holding her face composed for 8 hours. She felt it on the bus home, and she felt it standing in her apartment looking at Devante's medications on the counter. She called Miss Gloria that night. Her grandmother answered on the first ring, the way she always answered, as if she had been waiting, which maybe she had been, or maybe she was just a woman who picked up the phone when it rang because she understood that someone calling you was an act of trust. "Baby," Miss Gloria said. That was all. Just that. And Lakeisha sat down on her kitchen floor, her back against the cabinet, and talked to her grandmother for an hour and a half, and by the end of it, she was not fixed. Why? Because there was nothing to be fixed, but she was steadied, which was the thing Miss Gloria had always been able to do for her. "Here's what I know about you," Miss Gloria said near the end. "You have never once needed someone else to tell you who you are. Don't start now. Don't give them that. They want you small because small is manageable. You are not manageable, baby. You never have been." Lakeisha smiled in the dark of her kitchen. "Miss Gloria, I'm serious. You hear me? I hear you. Good. Now eat something. You always forget to eat when you're upset." She was right. Lakeisha made herself a plate and ate it and went to bed and lay there in the dark looking at the ceiling and thought about manageable and unmanageable and what it meant to take up exactly the amount of space you were meant to take up in a world that kept trying to reduce the allocation. The next morning, Minjun called her into his office. She had been expecting it since the photo. She had prepared herself for several possible versions of this conversation, none of them good. All of them ending with some form of professional distance being firmly established, the way it needed to be, the way she had told herself it needed to be, and had believed for approximately 60% of the time she was telling herself that. She sat in the chair across from his desk. He was standing at the window with his back to her, looking at the skyline, which was something she had come to understand, was what he did when he was thinking something through before he said it. He turned around. "I saw the blog," he said, "and the comments." "So did I," she said. "Are you all right?" She looked at him. "I'm all right." A pause. "I want you to lead the Henderson presentation on Thursday. Full lead. Your analysis, your strategy, your name on the materials." She was very still. "That's currently Brittany's account." "It was her account. It's yours now. The original analysis that saved it was yours. The work being done on it is yours." He said this with the matter-of-fact delivery of someone stating a logistical reality, not granting a favor. "Is that a problem?" She held his gaze for a moment. "No," she said. "That's not a problem." He nodded. He started to turn back to the window, then stopped. "Lakeisha." "Yes." A pause, just a beat longer than professional. "What you're dealing with in this office is not acceptable. I should have addressed it sooner. I should have been paying attention to what was happening instead of—" He stopped, considered his words. "I will be paying attention going forward." She sat with that for a moment. The weight of it. What it acknowledged without naming. "Thank you," she said. She meant it, and it was the whole truth, and she kept the rest of what she felt about it to herself, for now, because she was still Lakeisha Barnes from Liberty City, and she had learned a long time ago that gratitude was not the same as trust, and trust was earned in time and through choices, not conversations. She stood up. She picked up her notebook. She went back to her desk and opened the Henderson file and worked until 7 that evening with a focus that was clean and sharp and completely her own. Thursday came. The Henderson presentation. Lakeisha walked into that conference room in her best blazer, the deep plum one she had bought on sale 3 years ago, and saved for moments exactly like this one. Her hair was out, natural and full, and she had her grandmother's gold earrings on because she had decided somewhere in the past 2 weeks that she was done editing herself into shapes that fit other people's comfort. Her notebook was under her arm, and her materials were prepared and organized, and she was ready. Brittany was in the room. She sat at the far end of the table with her arms crossed and her face doing the controlled neutral expression that communicated, to anyone who knew her, that she was furious. The Henderson clients were there, 2 men and a woman from their executive team, flown in from their Chicago headquarters, wearing the careful, evaluative expressions of people paying for expertise. Lakeisha presented for 35 minutes. She knew the material the way she knew her grandmother's recipe, completely and from the inside out, and she spoke about it with the clean confidence of someone who wasn't performing knowledge, but operating from it. She could see it happening in the room, the small shifts, the postures changing, the clients leaning forward rather than back, the woman from Henderson uncrossing her arms somewhere around the 12-minute mark and picking up her pen. When she finished, the Henderson woman said, "This is the first time this campaign has made sense to me in 3 months." The room was quiet. One of the Henderson men said, "Where has this analysis been?" Lakeisha kept her face composed. "It's been here," she said simply. She saw Minjun, who was standing near the door rather than seated, watching. He looked at her with an expression she was learning to read, which was that it wasn't many expressions at all, but one thing underneath everything, one clear, steady thing. She didn't let herself look at him for longer than a moment. After the room cleared, after the Henderson team had shaken her hand and scheduled a follow-up and left, after the other analysts had filed out with varying degrees of acknowledgement that ranged from genuine warmth to careful blankness, Brittany walked past her. She stopped. She looked at Lakeisha for a long moment. "Congratulations," she said. It was the emptiest word Lakeisha had heard all year. She received it with a nod and said nothing, and watched Brittany leave. She stood in the empty conference room, the one she had sat in alone on a Thursday night in her gray uniform, and written a note on spiral notebook paper. She touched the edge of the conference table once, lightly, just for a second. Then she went back to her desk and sent Miss Gloria a text. "Had a big day. Thinking of you." Her grandmother responded in 40 seconds with 3 heart emojis and a Bible verse, which was exactly the right response. Lakeisha smiled at her phone and went back to work. The thing between her and Minjun had no name. She had decided not to name it because naming things made them real in ways that could be taken, and she was not in a position to have something real taken from her right now. She had enough that was already at stake. But it was there. It was in the kitchen, and the Cuban coffee, and the late Miami nights, and the way he had started, gradually, to become easier around her, less armored. The precise formality of his speech loosened slightly in those late-night conversations, not sloppily, but humanly, and she found she could make him almost smile with a well-timed observation, and that almost smile was something she was collecting without admitting to collecting. She found out about the beach again one night when they happened to be leaving at the same time, and they ended up standing at the building entrance in the warm night air, the city going in all directions around them. "Come on," she said suddenly. He looked at her. "Where?" "The beach. It's 20 minutes. The ocean is sitting right there and you have never been, and that is a tragedy, and I refuse to allow it to continue." He looked at her with the expression of a man who had a very organized sense of how his evenings were supposed to go. "It's 11 o'clock, he said. "Exactly. Nobody's there. It's better." There was a pause that lasted long enough for her to think he was going to decline. Then he said, "I'll drive." She looked at him. "You're going to go?" "Don't make it a thing," he said, and started walking toward the parking garage. She pressed her mouth together to contain what was happening on her face and followed him. They drove to South Beach with the windows down and Miami rushing past them. And when they got there, Lakeisha took her shoes off immediately and walked onto the sand without ceremony and stood at the edge of the water and let the Atlantic Ocean run over her feet in the dark, and she felt something in her chest open like a window. Min-jun stood a few feet back, shoes still on, with the expression of a man recalibrating something. "Take your shoes off," she said. He took his shoes off. He walked to the water's edge. He stood beside her and they both looked at the black ocean for a moment, the waves coming in white and quiet, the city behind them glittering against the dark sky. "Okay," he said after a moment. His voice was different. Something had gone out of it that was usually in it. "Okay what?" she said. "Okay," he said again, like the word was doing something larger than it usually did. "I understand." She looked at him sideways. His face in the dark was open in a way that his face in the office never was, the same way hers was. Like the building had been the container for a version of themselves, and the beach at midnight was the place where those versions temporarily stepped out. "Good," she said. "You were overdue." He almost smiled. Fully almost, which was the most she had gotten. They stood there for a while. The water came in and went out. The city lights reflected on the black water. It was the closest they had ever stood. Not touching, but aware of every inch of the space between them with a completeness that was its own kind of contact. She drove home on the bus that night, turning what had happened over and over in her mind like a warm stone, looking at it from every angle. Mrs. Lee arrived in Miami on a Wednesday. Lakeisha didn't know she was coming until Jenny mentioned it obliquely, and by then she had already sensed it in the change in Min-jun's rhythm that week, the slightly increased tension in his shoulders, the way he was more careful with his words than usual. She was exactly what Lakeisha had expected, and also somehow more than that. Impeccably dressed, small and precise, with the particular authority of someone who had spent decades understanding that real power didn't need to raise its voice. She moved through KMG's executive floor with an ease that established, without any announcement, that she was someone whose approval shaped things. People adjusted their behavior when she was present, even people who had never met her. She met Lakeisha on the second day of her visit. Lakeisha had been presenting the Henderson follow-up to Min-jun in his office, and Mrs. Lee had appeared in the doorway, and Min-jun had gone completely still for a fractional second before turning. "Mother," he said, "you said 2 o'clock." "I said around 2, his mother said pleasantly. She looked at Lakeisha with bright, assessing eyes. "This must be the analyst you've been telling me about." "This is Lakeisha Barnes," Min-jun said. "She leads the Henderson account." Mrs. Lee looked at Lakeisha with the complete, unhurried attention of a woman who had evaluated many people in many situations and was not going to be rushed. Lakeisha held her gaze and kept her posture, and did not, with great deliberate effort, make herself smaller. "I've heard about the campaign correction," Mrs. Lee said. "That was impressive work." "Thank you," Lakeisha said. "June tells me you studied marketing at Florida A&M. "Yes." A pause. "That must have been a difficult path. Getting here from there." Lakeisha understood the layers in that sentence. From Florida A&M. From Liberty City. From a gray uniform on this same floor. From there to here. She let each layer sit for a moment. "Most paths worth taking are," she said. Mrs. Lee looked at her for another moment. Then she nodded once, a precise movement that communicated something Lakeisha didn't fully know how to read, and turned to her son and they switched into Korean for a moment, something brief and transactional. And then, Mrs. Lee left. Lakeisha went back to her materials. Min-jun sat at his desk. The room held a particular quality of silence. "She likes you," he said finally. Lakeisha looked up. "That was her liking me?" "For my mother, that was warm," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to the Henderson file. That evening, The dinner happened. She wasn't there for it. She knew about it from Devante, who had heard from her, which meant it was already the kind of thing that traveled. Min-jun had gone to dinner with his mother and Claire Han, who had been brought in from New York where she was presumably living her life, and had not particularly asked to be re-involved in this situation. She did not know what was said at that dinner. She knew that Min-jun returned to the office the next morning with the particular quality of a man who had spent an evening holding a position under pressure and was processing the cost of that. She did not ask. He did not tell her. They worked. And they worked well together in the particular way that people work who have learned each other's rhythms, and that was enough. It had to be enough. The gala was at the Perez Art Museum Miami on a Friday night in October, when Miami had finally, mercifully, come down from its summer heat into something that felt like the rest of the world's fall, warm and bearable, and full of that particular Miami golden light that made everything look like it was being filmed. Lakeisha got ready in her apartment in Liberty City with Beyoncé on the speaker, and her best friend from Florida A&M on the phone, who had driven down from Tallahassee just to help her get ready, which Lakeisha had said was unnecessary and had secretly been deeply grateful for. The dress was deep burgundy, a color she had chosen because it was fully itself and made no apologies. And it fit her the way clothes fit women who have stopped dressing for other people's eyes. Her hair was down, natural and full and real, and she had her grandmother's gold earrings on, the ones Miss Gloria had put in her hands at the airport when she had first moved to Miami and said, "You wear these when you need to remember who you are." She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a long time. "I am not the one today," she said. Except that today she meant it differently. Today she meant, nobody can touch me. Today she meant, I know exactly who I am. She rode to the gala with a colleague, a kind older woman named Rosa, who had been quietly decent to her from the beginning, and who said when she saw Lakeisha in the burgundy dress, "Oh, honey, somebody is going to have a whole evening." Lakeisha laughed. The Perez Art Museum at night was everything Miami knew how to do with money and culture and water. The waterfront was lit up, and the bay was dark and flat behind it, and the building itself was the kind of architecture that made you feel like the world had good ideas sometimes. The whole industry was there, all the people who made decisions about brands and campaigns and what the culture was doing, circulating through the space with their glasses of wine and their professional faces. Lakeisha walked in and felt the room. She was good at feeling rooms. She had been doing it all her life, reading the temperature of spaces, knowing who was paying attention to what and how and why. She moved through it with the ease of someone who had decided tonight was hers. She saw Min-jun across the room almost immediately. He saw her at the same moment. She watched it happen on his face, the thing that crossed it before he could manage it, before the professional composure came back down. It was just a second. But it was the whole second. Then Claire Han appeared at his side and put her hand on his arm, and his mother was 3 feet away, and the industry's most influential people were in every direction, and the architecture of his whole life was arranged around him in one room. Lakeisha watched him make the calculation. She understood it in real time, every piece of it, because she had spent her life learning to read exactly this kind of moment. The moment when someone who has been brave in private finds out what they're made of in public. She straightened her shoulders. She carried herself across the room. She stopped to talk to the Henderson clients who were present and who greeted her with genuine warmth, networked with 2 people she had wanted to meet, laughed at the right times, said the right things. She was warm and charming and completely professional. And when she crossed Min-jun's path later in the evening, she said hello, and he said hello, and he introduced her to someone as Lakeisha Barnes. She leads our Henderson account. And when Brittany appeared nearby and said something dismissive and loaded, Min-jun let it land without challenge, and the evening continued. She stayed until the end. She thanked the hosts. She smiled at all the right people. She said goodnight to Rosa and walked out into the Miami night and stood for a moment on the waterfront steps with the bay behind her and the city in front of her. She breathed. She felt it settle into her. What had happened? The turning away. The public silence. She felt it clearly and honestly and without the pretense that it was something other than what it was. Then she flagged a rideshare and went home. She sat on her kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet and wrote in her notebook for an hour. Then she went to her desk and she opened her laptop and she wrote her resignation letter. It was professional and clean and correct. It said she was grateful for the opportunity and confident in the work she had done and wished the company continued success. And at the bottom, below the formal close, in handwriting rather than type, she wrote, "You taught me my work has value. I won't forget that. I hope one day you stop being afraid of what's real." She sealed it in an envelope. She put it in her bag. She did not sleep very much. She left it on his desk before anyone arrived on Saturday morning, before the city was fully awake, the way she had arrived in this building every morning for 14 months, before anyone was watching. The Henderson account won the Southeast Regional Marketing Excellence Award on a Tuesday afternoon at a summit in downtown Miami, 3 weeks after Lakeisha's last day at KMG Capital Group. The award was presented at the Miami Beach Convention Center, in a room full of the industry's people. Min Jun was there with his team, and his mother was in the front row, and Claire was beside her, and everyone who had been part of the story was arranged around the edges of this moment. He walked to the podium when they called KMG's name. The applause was real and sustained, in the industry acknowledging work that genuinely deserved acknowledgement. He held the award, which was heavy and well-made, and felt in his hands like something earned. He looked at it. He thought about a gray uniform and a spiral notebook, and a torn page left under a brief with a paperclip. He thought about Cuban coffee made without asking, for 2 cups. He thought about a beach at midnight and the Atlantic coming in cold, and the city behind them like an audience. He thought about a hospital on a Saturday and Haitian food from 54th Street and a 20-year-old boy with kidney disease who had said, without any meanness, just plainly, "She's smarter than you." He thought about a burgundy dress and grandmother's gold earrings and a face that had held itself composed across an entire evening while he was not brave enough to be what he should have been. He thought about a resignation letter with handwriting at the bottom. "I hope one day you stop being afraid of what's real." He looked up from the award. He looked at the room. At all of it. The whole constructed landscape of his public life. Everything he had built and maintained and protected and optimized. The career, the reputation, the distance between himself and anything that might be difficult to explain. He brought the microphone closer. "This campaign was saved by an analyst named Lakeisha Barnes," he said. The room shifted. People turned toward the sound of the name, this specific name in this specific context. It's the way people turn toward something unexpected. She found the error that none of us found. She did it before she was even in a position where anyone was required to listen to her, before she had a desk on the floor where the campaign lived, before this company had given her any reason to believe her insight would be valued. She did it because it was right, and because she could not walk past something broken without trying to fix it. That is who she is. He paused. The room was very quiet. She deserved to be standing here. I should have made sure she was. He set the award on the podium. He stepped back from the microphone. His mother's face was stone. Claire's expression was something he would have to address later. The room was making the sounds rooms make when they are processing something they didn't expect. He walked off the stage. Few days after the event, he went to Jackson Memorial first. He went because Devante would know where she was, and because he owed it to Devante to look him in the eye before any of the rest of it. Devante was sitting up in his hospital bed when Min Jun arrived, watching something on his tablet, and he looked at Min Jun in the doorway with those clear, assessing eyes. "She's not here," Devante said. "I know," Min Jun said. "How is she?" Devante was quiet for a moment. He set down his tablet. She cried for 3 days and told me she was fine. She has been fine in the way that means she is absolutely not fine. He paused. She's been here every day volunteering in the pediatric ward, reading to the kids. She says it helps her think. Is she going back to Georgia? Flight's in 4 days, going to Miss Gloria's. Minjun stood in the doorway. 4 days, he said. Like the 2 words were a complete thought. Devante looked at him for a long, still moment. The look of a younger brother who knew everything and was deciding how much to say. She told me you got on the stage, Devante said. Yes. She cried when I told her. Then she said it didn't change anything. Then she cried again. A pause. She is a bad liar. I know. Devante picked up his tablet again. Pediatric ward is the 3rd floor. Room 312. He looked at the tablet. She's been there since 9 this morning. It's 2 in the afternoon. He turned a page. She's probably on her 3rd book by now. She does character voices. The kids love it. Minjun looked at him. Thank you, he said. Devante shrugged, his eyes on his tablet. Don't make me regret it, he said. Room 312 was a pediatric ward room with pale blue walls and drawings on the windows, and the sound, when Minjun found it, of a woman's voice, doing a fully committed impression of Captain Underpants. He stood in the doorway. Lakeisha was in a plastic chair pulled close to a small boy's bed, cross-legged, shoes off, entirely herself. Her hair was tied back loosely. She was wearing jeans and a soft yellow top, and she looked more at ease than he had ever seen her in the office, which told him something about what the office had cost her that he was only beginning to fully understand. The small boy in the bed was laughing at the character voices with the complete, unguarded laugh of a 6-year-old who had no reason not to trust the world. Minjun waited. He stood in the doorway until the chapter was done. He watched her turn the last page and show the boy the picture, and listened to him say something that made her smile in the full, real way her smile went when she wasn't managing it. Then she looked up. She saw him. Her face went still. Not cold, not angry, just still. The way she went still when she was reading a situation before she responded to it. He walked into the room. He pulled the other plastic chair over and sat in it. It was too small for him, his knees up awkward, slightly ridiculous, and he sat in it anyway because there was nowhere else to sit, and he was not going to stand over her. The little boy looked at him with frank curiosity. Hi, the boy said. Hello, Minjun said. Do you know her? The boy asked, pointing at Lakeisha. Yes, Minjun said. He looked at Lakeisha when he said it. She does good voices, the boy said seriously. I believe you, Minjun said. Lakeisha was looking at him with that careful, reading look. He had come to know it, over all those late nights and Cuban coffee and conversations that went places he hadn't expected. He knew what it meant, which was that she was deciding how much to give and how much to hold and on what basis. He looked back at her without the composure he usually brought to difficult moments, without the managed distance. He was just there, just himself, whatever that was worth. I stood up in front of everyone and said your name, he said. I know that doesn't fix what I didn't do before, but I needed you to know that when I had the chance to choose, I chose to say the true thing out loud. She held his gaze for a long moment. Why? She said. He thought about all the careful answers he might give, all the professional language, all the safe framings. Because you have never hidden yourself to make anyone comfortable, he said. Not once, in all of it. And I have been hiding for so long I forgot what it felt like to be in a room as myself. He stopped. I'm tired, he said simply. I am genuinely tired of it. The little boy, who had been following this with the rapt attention of someone watching a show, said loudly, Say yes, lady. Lakeisha looked at the boy. Then she looked at the ceiling. She pressed her lips together and they were doing something, the corners of her mouth. She picked up the Captain Underpants book and held it in front of her face, and behind it her shoulders were doing what shoulders do when the laugh that has been held for too long finally gets out. And when she lowered the book, she was still smiling, but her eyes when they met his were serious and clear and completely Lakeisha Barnes. "Minjun," she said. "Yes. My flight is in 4 days." "I know. Devante can't travel yet." "I know." "Then what exactly?" She paused. Started again. "What is it you're asking me?" He leaned forward in the too small chair, elbows on his knees, and he looked at her with the look he had been not giving her for months, just directly, just fully, just without the architecture of professional distance between them. "I'm asking you to let me show you I can be brave enough to deserve you," he said. "Not in private, not only when it's easy, in public, completely, with my mother's opinion and the industry gossip and all of it watching. No more turning away." The little boy said louder, "Say yes, lady." Lakeisha's laugh came out full then, the real one, the one that filled the room, and she covered her face with Captain Underpants and her shoulders shook with it, and the little boy laughed too because laughter is that way. When she lowered the book, her eyes were bright, and her expression was the most open he had ever seen it. "One chance," she said, quietly, steadily. "You get one. I am not a try-again situation. I am not a second time around. You get one chance and you use it right, or you don't get to come back. You understand me?" "Yes," he said. "I mean it." "I know you mean it," he said. "That's why I'm here." She looked at him for a long, long moment. All of it in that look. All 14 months, and the gray uniform and the spiral notebook, and the stairwell, and the croquetas on the left, and the beach at midnight, and the gala, and the resignation letter, and the award stage. And here, this room, this chair, this version of him, that was the most real version she had seen. "Okay," she said softly. The little boy erupted. Minjun sat back in his chair and breathed. Lakeisha looked at the boy and said, "You are a menace, you know that?" The boy said, "She said yes, she said yes," and started telling the ceiling about it. Marcus was waiting by the hospital entrance. He had driven there. He had not said he was coming, just texted her. "On my way," and she had understood and not objected. He stood with his arms crossed and his face doing the Marcus thing, in which was that he was reading the situation in real time and reserving judgment pending further information. He looked at Minjun. He looked at Lakeisha. He looked at Minjun again, with the particular look of a man who had known someone for 24 years and was prepared to have a very direct conversation if necessary. Minjun met his gaze without flinching. "Marcus Webb," Lakeisha said. "Be nice." "I'm always nice," Marcus said. To Minjun. "You better act right," Minjun said. "I intend to." Marcus looked at him for another moment. Then he looked at Lakeisha and she looked back at him, and something passed between them. The communication of people who have known each other since the 4th grade, which requires no words and encompasses everything. Marcus nodded. Slowly. Once. "Okay then," he said. And the three of them stood in the Miami evening, the hospital entrance behind them, the city in front of them, the warm October air doing that Miami thing where it felt like an embrace. The sky was going from blue to that specific pink-orange that only happened here, the light that made everything look like the beginning of something. Minjun's phone was going off in his jacket pocket. It had been going off at intervals for the past 20 minutes. His mother, almost certainly. Possibly Claire. Possibly every corner of the life he'd been living that was now rearranging itself. He didn't reach for it. Lakeisha noticed. He saw her notice it. Saw the very small shift in her expression that meant she understood what that cost and that she was keeping an accounting of it. Not as leverage, not as a test, but as information. as data for a woman who had been burned before and had a right to her own careful record of what was true. She had her notebook under her arm, her grandmother's gold earrings, the yellow top, her hair loose now, the evening warm enough for that. She looked at the sky, at the pink-orange city. She breathed. It was the first breath in 4 days that felt all the way in and all the way out. She didn't know what came next. She was smart enough to know that wanting something to be different and it being different were not the same thing, and that a man standing in a hospital doorway willing to be brave for the first time was not the same as a man who would be brave every time going forward when the world had opinions about who he was supposed to choose. She knew all of that, but she also knew this. She was Lakeisha Barnes from Liberty City, Miami, who had ridden 2 buses every morning to a building where nobody knew her name, and had sat on a stairwell eating her lunch alone and writing ideas in a spiral notebook because there was no other container for them, and had cleaned a conference room floor and then sat at its table on the same night and left a note that changed the whole story. She had carried Devante through the worst years. She had held herself together in rooms that didn't want her. She had kept her dignity in every situation that tried to take it, and had kept her work good in every situation that tried to make her invisible. She had not, in all of that, stopped being exactly herself for a single day. And now she was standing in a Miami evening in October with the sky going pink-orange and her best friend of 24 years on her left and a man on her right who had finally, in front of everyone, said her name out loud. And the city was going on in every direction, indifferent and loud and gorgeous the way Miami always was, and Devante's levels were down, and Miss Gloria's earrings were in her ears, and she had a notebook under her arm full of ideas that were not going to stop coming. She smiled, very slightly, facing forward. "Okay," she said, to nobody in particular, or maybe to all of it, to the sky, to the city, to what was coming. Lakeisha Barnes from Liberty City, Miami, knew the road would hold. She was right. And this is only the beginning. If this story moved you, if you felt every piece of what Lakeisha carried and every moment of what she chose, I'm asking you to do something before you go. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because this community is built on stories like this one. Stories about love and dignity and what it means to refuse to be made small. And share this with someone who needs it today. Someone who is sitting on their own stairwell somewhere, eating their lunch alone, writing ideas in a notebook nobody has asked for yet. Share it with them. Because this story is for them. Part 2 is coming. And you are not going to want to miss what happens next.